shutter paint, again non-contiguous. I've got an olive green colour, an ink mode, material locked just over the shutters, which are called in this particular instance Gene Blue, according to the model there. It's an interesting naming convention, but it just goes to show you don't have to name your model anything in particular. It could just be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It makes no difference as long as there's an identifier for that particular material. It really doesn't matter what you call it. So we paint up our shutters. Use the alpha texture again, this time a slightly smaller line, smaller scale. Click once to apply a texture to those shutters. Paint all of our columns and soffit in one go. Again, materials, they've all got the same material assignation. Now we come to one of the painterly brushes that I was talking about. As you can see, we have it selected over here. Now you might just be able to see from the preview that actually it's a rectangular shape. Now in fact this isn't a single brush, this is 3 brush marks all being used together. If I come up to here, you can see on the define button, I click it, there are 3 different brushes, and if you can look closely you'll see that actually what they were felt pen strokes that we simply scanned and stored as a brush style. And again, you can do exactly the same thing yourself. If you want to get a particular stipple effect or something, you could dip your paintbrush in some paint, put it onto a piece of paper, scan that piece of paper and store that actually as a brush. And we'll be using a raster brush that's a similar kind of style to that later in the presentation itself. In this particular one, as I said, we've got 3 different felt pen style strokes, and as you can see, the X is the hook point, but this is the starting point. When I click, it will paint from this position, and the hook point's slightly different in each of them, and the angle's slightly different in each of them. And what it's going to do is, it's very rapidly, as I hold my mouse down, going to cycle through these three brushes. Now we've got a very bright blue selected here, but equally, in our dynamic settings, what we've got is what's called a color spread. So if you imagine that in a 256 color range we're starting out at this point, it's going to give a spread of 22, so about 10% difference on either side of that blue. So effectively what we'll get is a number of different blues painting in sequence as it scrolls through that list of 3 brushes. I'll go over to the background sky area at the moment just so you can clearly see what's happening. If I hold my mouse down now, you should hopefully see that it's sequencing through those 3 different brushes at the various different angles. And it's just overlaying colour. It's in ink mode, so it's in overlay mode effectively at a 50% opacity, so it's going to build the colour up. The reason that we use this brush is that when I go over the windows, and you'll see the brush scaling up as well depending on where I am within my image, so it gets very small at the front and very large at the back. If I go over my area of glass, again I've got a material lock turned on. It's called charcoal, interestingly. I'm going to hold my mouse down and just gently move over the glazing area, and you'll see what it does is it's cycling through those brush shapes, just giving a nice little sort of suggestion of glazing to my image. And I'm holding my mouse down, but I don't have to be accurate because it's anchored and locked to that particular material on which I first click, in this case the glazing. Okay, so even somebody as fingers and thumbs with a mouse as I am can still be reasonably accurate, or completely accurate, pixel accurate in fact, with the paintbrush. So I'm just going to paint up the front door as well, and that's pretty much painted up our building with the colours and textures that we want to start with. And now we need to put the image into context. You'll see there's a Jeremy style down here at the bottom, and essentially all I used for that was I was identifying that this is how you create a style within the product. You basically define your brush, pick whatever you want as a colour, and then you just create a new item down in our style library. So you can right click new style or use control in as a shortcut, and it will pick up the material informations and any textures or grain effects that you've got with your brush. Call it whatever you like, and that's the way that you store them within your style library for future use. So it's a very simple method to be able to store those brushes within easily accessible folders. And if I change the configuration of my brush, for example, I pick a magenta instead. If I select it and apply it again, it's now just going to change the color, overwrites it with what I have, and I've changed my brush. So it's a very easily configurable way to shortcut the process and make sure that your palette is available with everything that you need. Okay, so on to putting our house into context. Now, as you saw earlier on with the texture drop-downs, we have the ability to be able to drop in backgrounds of photographic backgrounds, things like skies and stuff like that. And if I just show you, I'll pick a fill can to use for this. I've got a material. I'm going to be painting in the infinity mode, and it's the background color area. So if I pick my paint, and I'm just going to fill it in, and it's automatically masked out behind the building because it knows that the background area is effectively behind my building. It's an infinite distance, whereas my building occupies a distance in front of that. So automatically, it's masking out that area behind the building. I don't have to do any masking myself. I might tweak that if I decide it's too large an image. I'm just going to tweak mode, which image with any of the textures that I put in place. I could alter the angle of my my brickwork or tiling or anything like that using tweak very easily. So I could scale my image accordingly. Come out of tweak mode, and I've got my background in place. And this is really helpful if you're doing things like putting a building into an existing plot space where there might be houses on either side, or if you're doing a landscape project, you want to make sure that the area that you're developing sits into context within the main region of development. And so you could take a site photograph, for example, and drop it in as a background behind your scheme that you're proposing. Again, with automatic masking around your building. Now, the finished illustration that I'm going to come up with is actually going to be much more suggestive and watercolor style, so I don't really want to use a photographic background. So I'm going to get rid of that. As you'll see, I've got some raster brushes in a line down here at the bottom. And again, you can see the preview of my brush, and it is exactly like I was talking about. It's one of these brushes where we've picked a paintbrush and created a splodge on a piece of paper that we've just scanned in. In this case, it looks probably like a scumble brush or something like that, to generate this interesting raster pattern, and then define that as a brush and stored it. And you pick out your brushes through the browse option here. So this is our little contextual area. So this is our raster brush. You can have standard brushes like round brushes and rectangular brushes, and particularly bristle brushes. But I've got a raster brush that I found from my particular folder, Piranesi American House and Textures, and there's all the brushes available. We show previews and things, you can see all the various different ones that ship with Piranesi. And there's, as I say, there's an extensive library. There are brush stroke felt pen marks like we saw earlier with the diagonal ones. There's an extensive library available for you out of the box. So in this particular instance, I've got a raster brush that's a bit like a stipple, and it's got a nice bright blue with a 50% opacity, so it will build colour. And I'm going to click and hold and just put in a suggestion of a sky. And again, because I start behind the house in the infinite distance, it understands that what I'm doing is I'm painting behind my building rather than in front. So I don't have to worry about going over the house or anything like that. It won't. It will limit itself purely to the area in which I first defined, in this particular instance, the sky. Same applies for the ground strokes. One important thing to say actually when you're exporting out of SketchUp is to remember to tick the option to include the ground plane as well, otherwise you get some rather interesting effects. But it's a simple tick box on the export, so I promise you that you won't forget to do it more than once. So click and hold and just swoosh, and I'm just literally just going to whiz that across. I'm not going to be accurate at all. Again, because I'm anchoring with a material lock on, and it's locked to the first material on which I click. In this case, it's the ground, as you can see in the top right-hand corner here. I can just play around and not worry about being accurate whatsoever. There we go. Typical painting tool options such as pencil give us the option to add things like line extensions. Now, if you're a SketchUp user, you're probably used to using line extensions to give that kind of sketchy look to your finished illustrations. In this particular instance, I'm just going to add a few just to show you it's the kind of thing that you can do to loosen up an illustration. Just give it that little hand-rendered look, and the suggestion that it's not actually finished and the client still has a creative involvement in the process, and still has the feel that they can get parts of their personality or their own imagination to play in this particular project. And now we come to cutouts. Now, the great thing about cutouts is that they use the depth information available within the model to automatically scale depending on where you move your mouse around the screen.